Jerusalem Online, I'm Mike Greenspan. On this week's Look at the People and the Stories Behind the News from Israel, another special look at this country and the fabric of its society, marking Israel's 50th anniversary. In recent years, especially since the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, Israelis have been increasingly aware of the differences separating them. For the most part, the lines are drawn between observant Israelis, people who lead their lives according to the dictates of religious law and tradition, and the majority of Israelis whose lifestyle, while it may reflect Jewish tradition, is decidedly secular. Are we growing apart? And if so, what can bring us back together? This question is of concern not only to Israelis, but to Jews around the world. For Professor Aviezar Rביצקי, chairman of the Jewish Philosophy Department at Hebrew University here in Jerusalem, the question of Jewish unity or disunity is an abiding academic and personal interest. He's also the author of this book, which talks about the subject in new terms, Messianism, Zionism, and Jewish Religious Radicalism. Part of the mix here in Israel. Here's the man who wrote it. Professor Rביצקי, welcome.
Thank you.
We talk about Jewish unity, but maybe we're deluding ourselves by even using that term in the first place. When have Jews ever really been one cohesive, coherent, homogeneous people? Ever?
Yeah, we don't have to share the same ideological or theological commitments and beliefs. But we must find a way to coexist together with some sort of at least a partial harmony and agreement how we can coexist. Now, you know that just after the establishment of the State of Israel, some sort of a political status quo was achieved. It was not only a political status quo. It was, I believe, an unwritten social charter, how we are going to live together without an agreement, without the same ideology and theology. It was effective for a generation, perhaps. Perhaps despite the inner contradictions which are there in the old status quo, or perhaps because of the inner contradictions that nobody won, nobody totally failed, everybody was partially frustrated, partially successful. But almost every Israeli that you will encounter today will tell you the status quo is over, we need a new social charter.
We'll talk about the new charter in a minute, but let's examine the reasons for a second why the status quo broke down.
Yes,
after all, you
exactly.
said we're all Jewish. That should guarantee tolerance of one person by another person, of varying lifestyles, and yet it didn't. Does that have something to do with the fact that in Israel, religion and politics mix, that people accumulate power and people who have it tend to use power?
Certainly, but I would like to start with the cultural arena. Namely, the status quo, I believe, was based upon a false common denominator, a common mistake of both sides. Everybody believed that the other one is going to become weaker and weaker, and eventually, with God's help or with the help of history, to disappear.
So the secular Israelis thought that the religious would disappear, and the religious thought the secular would become religious, or something like
exactly. For David Ben-Gurion, the first secular prime minister of Israel, you know, Orthodox Jews, they belong to our situation in exile. Once we normalize ourselves, territory, political sovereignty, national language, they are going to become marginal, to disappear. The same for the other side. For the ultra-Orthodox Jews, the very existence of a secular Jew is an oxymoron. A Jew is a religious term. A secular Jew cannot exist. So half of them will repent, half of them will assimilate. But not only for the ultra-Orthodox, even for the most moderate, modern Orthodox, where I grew up in Bnei Akiva, what was the real belief? Who is the secular Zionist? Yes, he or she, they claim that they rebel against their grandparents, against Torah, against the Messianic idea. What do they do in practice? They return from foreign countries to the Holy Land, from foreign tongues to the Holy Land. Eventually, when they achieve their political and mundane achievements, they will realize that they want something else, something deeper, namely a spiritual return. So everybody made an agreement with somebody who is going to disappear.
Let's talk about that. What you're saying reflects the absolutism of religious belief. Religious belief, when you're a true believer, tends to be absolute, meaning in simple terms, if I am right, those who behave differently than I do, are by definition wrong. Okay, Back again to the situation of Israel, a country in which politics and religion mix. We have religious parties in our parliament, in our Knesset. Can that kind of absolutism ever really play the democratic game that Israel has predicated its existence upon?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't imply that the source of the problem stems from an absolutism of one side. I was saying directly that both sides believed that they are going to win within history and the future is with them. From Ben Gurion to the ultra-Orthodox, everybody was sure, from the socialists to the ultra-Orthodox, that the future is with them. Now you raise a very serious question. Namely, can the ultra-Orthodox, let's start with them, adopt liberal democratic ideas?
Can they accept compromise?
Yes, I believe they can, not theologically. They are not supposed, and we shouldn't expect them to digest all the values of modern, liberal, secular Western world. But the procedures, how we are going to make decisions, is it by guns or by words? Is it by sword or by going to an election?
Is it by persuasion or coercion?
So I believe that despite the fact that I oppose them politically, they are playing very effectively the democratic game. You know, the Western, the Ashkenazi, Haredi Jews, they have 4% in our parliament, namely 5 seats, 4%. All the Orthodox Jews in Israel are a minority. The power, if they have an unproportional power, it is because of the fact that the two secular parties gave it to them. They didn't take it without undemocratically.
We'll go on talking about that balance of power after we take a short break. I'll be back with more with Professor Avi Rביצקי when Jerusalem Online continues.
We saw a city built on hope and touched a wall that touched us back. We swam under a crystal waterfall hidden in the desert and explored mysteries that we had only read about. And we watched as children danced to melodies 2,000 years old. In Israel, we found something we didn't even know we were looking for. Ourselves. Israel. No one belongs here more than you.
Jerusalem Online. Don't miss it. Jerusalem Online continues now. My special guest is Professor Avi Rביצקי, an expert on Jews, Judaism, and Israel, it's fair to say.
Thank you.
Professor, after 1967, Israel, both the political and the religious entity, experienced what I guess you'd have to call a turning point. That miraculous war gave Israel a presence in biblically promised lands, what some people call the West Bank and others call Judea and Samaria. with that occupation of those lands arose a kind of Jewish Messianism, a belief of something going forward according to a divine plan. On the other hand, an example that has nothing to do with war is the declaration by the Chabad, the Lubavitch movement in recent years, of the late Rabbi Menachem Schneerson as being the Messiah. Are we witnessing a change in the attitude of Jews as far as their religion goes, or is this just the repetition of a phenomenon we've seen before in Jewish history?
With respect to the religious Zionist Jews, until the last few years, there was a very radical change. Because I assume that you remember that the modern Orthodox Jews in Israel, or the National Religious Party, before 1967, it was supposed to be a very moderate party that can join hands with the Labour Party or with some other parties. They would like to preserve their own religious education, to influence the society culturally, but a coexistence with all the Jews and the Arabs in Israel could be preserved. You are right that after 1967, all the atmosphere has been changed, and a new generation got up who believed that they are the pioneer not only of Zionism and the Jewish people, but of God. They are performing the divine demand to conquer and settle the whole land of Israel. Everybody who does not do it becomes an enemy of the divine history. So there was a divine call for them to become much more active politically, agriculturally, and settle the land.
It gives me the feeling that people who feel differently than that, the people on the left who may see things in less absolute and more relative terms, are constantly wondering whether they're right or not, where the people who are messianically oriented are convinced that they're right. That gives them the upper hand in the Israeli political equation, doesn't it?
Yes, you were right until the last few years. During the last few years, when a withdrawal from Judea and Samaria, not from the West Bank in the Jewish terms, is taking place again and again, it seems to be a falsification of the messianic agitation. Because if you are within a messianic process, you must go forward and forward. It is a deterministic march towards redemption. Suddenly, a withdrawal, you go back, and if you are used to identify territorial achievement with spiritual achievement, with messianic achievement, a territorial withdrawal becomes something very negative in your own theology.
Which may explain why prime ministers get murdered for withdrawing from territories.
Yeah, but I'm not speaking now about the murderer. I speak about a spiritual phenomenon which gradually created a lesser sense of confidence within the vast majority of religious Zionists.
Okay, we're going to go on talking about that confidence, lack of it, and some inward-looking Israelis who are trying to address the future differently right after we take a break. More with Professor Avi Revitsky right after this. Stay with us.
Jerusalem Online Headlines, I'm Jonathan Elkins. Israel's Supreme Court has disqualified a political party running in local elections in Upper Nazareth due to incitement to racism by its candidate for mayor, Zev Hartman. During hearings, the state attorney's office noted that Hartman's platform declares, "We will stop the Arab takeover of Upper Nazareth." Meanwhile, Hartman's party claims that the racist segment has been deleted from the platform and that they do not hold racist views. The oldest known leopard in Israel, 25-year-old Babta, died recently at the Yod Fatah Nature Reserve near Eilat. Babta's capture some 25 years ago was the first proof that leopards still survived in the Judean desert. According to Israel's Parks Authority, Babta's body will be used to study the genetic makeup of wild cats in the region. Internationally acclaimed Israeli choreographers Liat Jor and Nir Ben-Gal are premiering their new work, The Dance of Nothing, in Israel. The work, which made its original debut in France, is about Israel's new generation in search of an identity. The company has already performed the dance in several cities throughout Europe, including Zurich, Copenhagen, Bonn, Vienna, and Glasgow. On to sporting news. Basketball phenomenon Oded Katash was all set to be the first ever Israeli to play in the NBA after being signed by the New York Knicks earlier this year. But all that was put on hold when the NBA decided to strike. Now Katash is back to his old tricks again, helping his former team Maccabi Tel Aviv defeat several European clubs in international play. However, Katash insists he will fulfill his dream to play in the NBA once the season gets underway. And finally, Tel Aviv has been named one of the top 10 high-tech capitals of the world in an article recently published by Newsweek. Tel Aviv shares the list with 7 American cities, 1 Indian city, and Cambridge, England. The magazine noted the 1,000 high-tech companies in Tel Aviv, including several world leaders, the influx of skilled Russian immigrants into Israel's high-tech industry, as well as the contribution of the Israeli Defense Forces to technical training in the local workforce. The article cited several experts who say that Tel Aviv may be Silicon Valley's most serious competition. I'm Jonathan Elkins for Jerusalem Online.
Welcome back. You're watching Jerusalem Online with my special guest, Professor Avi Rביצקי, author of this book, Messianism, Zionism, and Jewish Religious Radicalism. Heavy stuff. Professor, one of the things that's been happening recently in this country is that some of the avowed secular Jews, the ones who not only didn't take a great interest in, but maybe even had an antagonism toward religious belief, are going back and trying to reacquaint themselves with their Judaism. They're going to study groups. They're learning about Jewish scholarly writings. Does this reflect some feeling on their part that maybe they missed the boat by ignoring their Judaism?
Yeah, but I believe it is a little more complicated. First of all, we have to understand that it is not a religious return. It is not even a spiritual return as you may find in many circles within American Jewry. It is a cultural return, an historical one. They are not going to repent. It is an intellectual, historical, cultural interest in the source of their very being and of their own history.
Maybe it's an attempt on their part to also understand why they have this antagonism existing between secular and religious Jews in Israel.
Yeah, perhaps, but I believe that there are 2 main reasons for it. First of all, that, a vacuum has been created once you don't speak the language of your sources. Your very Jewish language or your very Hebrew language becomes dull and superficial. There is a very deep difference between, for instance, an Israeli author or an Hebrew poet who knows Bible, Talmud, Midrash, medieval creativity, etc., and can use, the rich vocabulary and creativity of Jewish history, and ones who is not aware of it completely. But the second explanation is also very important. There was an unwritten agreement. The religious will keep the tradition. We, the secular, will build the land. I believe that in the eyes of many secular Jews today, the religious or the Orthodox betrayed their promise. They feel that if, even without the attention, people like Yigal Amir can murder the prime minister, and Goldstein can murder innocent Arabs, if some of them, or even with regard to some rabbis that they hate, if we cannot let them, they believe, handle our tradition. We have to regain the memory of our grandparents and to suggest a new interpretation. So there is here a tension between, on the one hand, a feeling of a shortage, of a vacuum. On the other hand, the feeling that we have to regain our tradition, to reinterpret it.
Has there been any similar response among observant or Orthodox observant Jews in the other direction to regain their membership in the club called Israeli Society?
I think that it exists. I don't know the numbers, but during the last 2 years, there are many new phenomena within the modern Orthodox Israeli youth which can promise such a development in the present and the future. Let me tell you that, for instance, Professor Charles Liebman of Bar-Ilan University very recently wrote a paper, Why Modern Orthodox Israelis Are More Liberal Than Modern Orthodox Americans. And it is a new phenomenon. He wouldn't write such a paper 10 years ago.
The bottom line for many of us is, though, that if we're secular, our kids go to secular schools, and if we're observant, our kids go to religious schools. And while the secular kids are required to learn Torah, we're not sure what the religious kids are required to learn about, let's say, citizenship. And don't we end up, from the time of childhood, creating 2 different societies here?
Yes, we do. A half year ago, I went to meet the Minister of Education, Rabbi Yitzhak Levy, and I told him the following. The late Minister of Education, Zvulun Hammer, did something very important. He established Vadat Shenhar, which was supposed to suggest how we are going to deepen the Jewish education within secular schools. It was very important, it should be handled. But there is another half. You have to perform now a new committee which will find ways how to deepen the universal, humanistic, democratic education within religious schools. Once these two committees operate together, we can regain the common language.
Do you think that will happen?
I want it to happen. I'll fight that it will happen. I'll do everything I can do to fulfill it.
And we'll talk about what is likely to happen right after we take a short break. Stay with us, and stay with our POB if you have something to say to us in terms of comments, questions, or suggestions. Send them to this address. Jerusalem Online, POB 33003, Jerusalem, Israel. Fax us at country code 972-538-1658. You'll find our email address at jol@internet-zahav.net. We're on the World Wide Web as well at cyberscribe.com/jol. By the way, our POB is also the place to send your letters of support telling us why you'd like this program to stay on the air. We've heard from many of you. We need to hear from more. Please talk to us. And remember to tell us when and on what station you watch Jerusalem Online, whenever you write. Stay with us. I'll be back with more with Professor Avi Revitsky right after this. Israel offers a wide range of excellent accommodations, including major international hotel chains. Israel's restaurants offer an unbelievable variety of choices, from ethnic specialties to haute cuisine, the culinary legacy of a land populated by immigrants from around the world. In Israel, opposites collide and combine, creating a colorful cultural mosaic where past, present, and future fuse into a timeless rendezvous of endless options, where East really does meet West. Israel offers a greater variety of incentive vacations than anywhere else on earth, rich in tradition and history. Wherever you turn, there are ancient holy sites of the major religions, like Nazareth and the Sea of Galilee. Welcome back. You're watching Jerusalem Online with my special guest, Professor Avi Revitsky. We're talking about Jews, Judaism, and life here in Israel. Professor, we get the impression that the secular Israelis tend to favor the peace process, while many of the religious Israelis tend to be against it. Are the dividing lines all that sharp, or is this another one of those misperceptions that stems from inaccurate media coverage?
I believe it's a very extreme misperception. Let me remind ourselves that Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Sharon, Mr. Rafael Eitan, and even Mr. Rehavam Ze'evi, all of them are secular Jews. Let us remind ourselves that Rav Ovadia Yosef, Rav Amital, Rav Lichtenstein, and even the Sephardic chief rabbi, all of them support the peace process, and they are very, very religious and Orthodox Jews. And even within the ultra-Orthodox community, there is a tremendous debate about the peace process. Despite this fact, unfortunately, I have to admit that most Orthodox Jews do not support the peace process. They believe that, our commitment to the land of Israel, to the old biblical territories and landscapes are very important for our future, for our historical memory. I myself would prefer to have peace and to pay a very heavy territorial price. But I believe I represent a significant minority, not the majority within the modern Orthodox Jews.
People in that minority in recent years have raised the fear of something they call a culture war, the possibility of a real clash, and I'm not quite sure in what terms that clash would occur, between secular and religious, between left and right, between Jew and Jew. Do you view that kind of clash as inevitable or preventable?
If when you speak about civil war, you mean that people will take guns, I mean that thousands of people will take guns, as in Spain, it's not going to happen. But if you speak about a tension which can become more and more radical, moreover, if and when we achieve peace with the Palestinians, I believe that our inner problems may become more acute and more radical.
So what are the largest or the most insoluble of those problems? What are our inner problems? It's not just a matter of seeing Judaism through different eyes.
First of all, the Israeli public space. How are we going to behave? For instance, Shabbat. According to the halakha, to the old classical Jewish law, taxis and buses are not supposed to go in the streets on Shabbat. We argue about our public space. We argue about the way a Jewish Israeli will have to be married. We argue about our future education. There is a political disagreement, there is an ideological disagreement, and there is a theological disagreement.
Let's take it all back home now. Let's take it into your home. Avi Rביצקי, you wear a kippah, so obviously you're observant. You talk about giving back the land of Israel, so obviously you're liberal. You sound like a rational human being.
No, I care about human life. I agree to give back territories because I am religious, not despite of this fact. I believe that if you are a religious person, your care for human life should be even, you should be more sensitive because, you know, losing human life here is not only an ethical sin, it's only a theological, ontological, a cosmic sin against the very reality of the world. Because I am religious, I want peace.
Professor Avi Rביצקי, l'chaim, and thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of a very thought-provoking look at the people and the stories behind the news from Israel. We'll have another one coming your way next week. Please join me then. I'm Mike Greenspan. This is Jerusalem Online. Shalom.